The air inside Pine Creek's community center dojo was warm with the scent of mats and the faint tang of disinfectant. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the high windows, catching on dust motes that drifted lazily over the floor. Teenagers stretched and loosened up, chatter bouncing off the walls in bursts of energy and ego. Sneakers squeaked on the polished wood near the entrance as someone adjusted their bag, laughter rising and falling like waves. Then, the double doors swung open. Loretta Johnson stepped inside as if she owned the space. 66 years had given her a presence that no rank or belt could grant. Her back was straight, chin level, every movement measured. She might have been another quiet grandmother if not for what she wore, an unmistakable blazing pink gi that caught the light like a challenge. The color seemed to hum against her deep brown skin, a bold defiance in a room of white and black uniforms. The room reacted instantly, heads swiveled, smirks curved lips. A few phones appeared, slyly angled for quick snapshots. Low whispers bloomed in the corners. Is she serious? Who is that? And swirled through the space like an invisible draft. Loretta felt every pair of eyes on her, cataloging her age, her choice of attire, her place in a world they'd already decided wasn't hers. The loudest sound came from the far side of the mat. Connor Williams, green belt tied sharp at his waist, sat with one leg stretched out, the other bent, leaning on his hand like a king lounging on his throne. 14 years old, tall for his age, with sandy hair that fell just right no matter how hard he trained, Connor had the kind of cocky ease that thrived in applause. His laugh cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Well, would you look at that?" he said loud enough for everyone to hear, his voice dripping mockery. "Careful, Granny might break a hip." Ripples of laughter followed, some hesitant, others cruelly eager. Loretta's gaze slid to him, calm and steady, but she said nothing. She let the sound wash over her as if it were nothing more than wind rattling the windows. Inside, her thoughts were quieter still. They see an old woman in ridiculous clothes, she told herself, not the fighter who once trained until midnight, sweat pouring down her back under Robert's watchful eye. They don't know the weight of the GI she wore then, or the bruises that faded into skill. They don't see the tournaments, the trophies, the days she could drive a fist into a target so clean the sound made the air pop. They don't see what Robert saw, the calm in her center, the patience that could wait out any opponent. They think the pink is a costume. Let them. The smirks lingered, the whispers scratched at her ears, but Loretta kept walking, each step a deliberate placement of foot on mat. Her belt ends swayed softly at her sides. Somewhere deep in her chest, the slow, coiled heat of resolve began to rise. Connor Williams had thrown the first punch, only with words, but that was fine. She'd learned long ago that the best counters came from patience. He wanted a joke. She'd give him a lesson. Jaden sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, fiddling with the straps on his school backpack when Loretta stepped through the door that evening. She had changed back into her cardigan and sensible slacks, but there was still a faint crease in her forehead, a remnant of the laughter and sideways glances that had greeted her in the dojo. She set down a brown paper bag from the market, the scent of fresh bread spilling into the air. "You didn't stay long," Jaden said without looking up. "I stayed long enough," Loretta replied, hanging her keys on the hook by the door. She didn't tell him about Connor's laugh or the way some of the parents had smiled like they were watching a toddler try on her daddy's work boots. She didn't have to. Jaden knew what Connor was like. He'd felt it firsthand. He zipped his bag shut and got to his feet, brushing crumbs from his shirt. "I told you he'd act exactly like a 14-year-old who thinks the world revolves around his belt color." Loretta's tone was calm, almost amused, but her eyes were sharp. "Yes, you did." They moved into the kitchen. Loretta set out 2 plates, slicing the bread while Jaden poured milk into glasses. The air between them was thick with unspoken things, his embarrassment, her stubbornness, the shared knowledge that the dojo wasn't going to be a friendly place for her. "You don't have to keep going," Jaden said finally, sliding her glass toward her. "He's going to make fun of you every time." Loretta spread butter across the bread with slow, deliberate strokes. "Jaden, do you know the best thing about being underestimated?" He shook his head. "You get to choose when to show them they were wrong." She glanced at him over the knife, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw something dangerous in her smile. That night, after the dishes were washed and Jaden had retreated to his room, Loretta stepped out onto the back porch. The moonlight caught in the fine lines around her eyes as she gazed across the small yard. The grass was cool beneath her bare feet as she walked to the center. She inhaled, deep and slow, letting the night air fill her lungs, and then she moved. It began with a stance, rooted, balanced, solid as the oak at the edge of the yard. Then came a slow pivot, the shift of weight, the sweep of her arm through the dark. Her body remembered more than she had given it credit for. Each movement unlocked another memory. Robert's hand correcting her elbow angle, the smell of chalky mats in their first tiny dojo, the way her pulse used to quicken before a tournament match. A light flicked on in the house. She turned her head slightly to see Jaden, framed in his bedroom window, watching with his hands pressed against the glass. She gave him a brief nod and returned to her kata. By the time she finished, her breath came quick and her muscles hummed with a deep, familiar ache. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this. Not just the motions, but the feeling, the discipline, the control, the quiet power that sat in the center of her chest like a steady flame. The next morning, she was up before sunrise. Jaden shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, to find her pulling on sneakers. "Where are you going?" he mumbled. "Community center," she said, tying the last knot. "Need to have a word with Coach Liam about my placement in class." Jaden blinked. "You mean not with the toddlers?" Loretta's smile was slow, like a storm gathering far out at sea. "Exactly." When she arrived, the dojo was still quiet, just Liam arranging pads and straightening the racks of weapons. He looked up, surprised to see her so early. "Loretta," he said, "everything all right?" "I'd like to be moved to the main group," she told him plainly. He hesitated. "The main class is fast-paced. I don't want you to—" She stepped forward, her eyes locking on his. "You've seen enough to know I can handle more than break falls with 4-year-olds. He studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "All right, but it's on you to keep up." By that afternoon, word had already spread through the teen ranks. Connor's smirk was practically splitting his face when she walked in. "Guess Granny thinks she's ready for the big kids." Loretta didn't look at him. Not yet. She had learned long ago that the quiet before the strike is what really unnerves an opponent, and she was ready to make that boy very nervous, just not in the way he expected. By Wednesday evening, the dojo was buzzing like a beehive before a storm. Students in crisp uniforms darted across the mat, the slap of bare feet mixing with the metallic rattle of weapons being stowed away. Parents filled the benches along the far wall, murmuring in little knots, their eyes flicking up whenever the door opened. When Loretta stepped inside, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity as before, but this time she wasn't headed toward the toddler's corner. She crossed the mat toward the main class lineup, her pink G cutting a vivid streak through the sea of white. Whispers followed her like a trailing sash. Some were mocking, others curious, but all of them noticed. Connor, already stretching in the front row, leaned back on his hands and grinned at his buddies. "Guess Granny's ready to upgrade her rocking chair," he said, not even bothering to lower his voice. The other boys laughed, but there was a quick darting glance in his eyes toward her, testing, probing, waiting for a reaction. Loretta gave him none. She simply took her place in line. Coach Liam's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Line up, bow in." The chatter cut off. The students bowed in unison, but Loretta's bow was deeper, slower, grounded in decades of muscle memory. Connor caught it out of the corner of his eye and frowned slightly without knowing why. Warm-ups began, jogging in place. Push-ups, squats. Loretta moved steadily, her breathing even, never falling behind. When it came to stretching, she dropped into a forward split so smoothly that the boy beside her stopped mid-stretch, blinking at her like he'd just seen a ghost. Then came drills. Pairs formed across the mat, practicing combinations of punches and blocks. Loretta was paired with Mia, a shy yellow belt no older than 12, whose eyes darted nervously between Loretta and Connor. "Don't hold back," Loretta told her, voice soft but firm. "This is your chance to get better." At first, Mia's punches were timid, more suggestion than strike, but Loretta guided her, adjusting a stance here, correcting a fist angle there, until the girl's movements began to gain weight and intention. When Mia finally landed a clean punch to the padded target Loretta held, the sharp pop echoed across the dojo. A few heads turned. Connor noticed. By the time water break rolled around, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and something else. Interest. Parents who had dismissed Loretta on Monday were leaning forward, watching her. A couple of students whispered to each other, glancing her way. Even Coach Liam's eyebrows lifted once or twice. But Connor wasn't clapping. He was studying her now, the easy smirk replaced by a calculating look. When class resumed, he accidentally switched partners, stepping into Loretta's line without being called. "Coach," he said casually, "I can work with her, help her catch up." Liam gave a faint frown but didn't intervene. "Fine, light contact, focus on form." They faced each other. Connor's grin returned, but it was different now, harder, hungrier. "Ready, Granny?" he murmured. "Always," Loretta said. He came in quick, testing with a jab. She parried with minimal movement, just enough to redirect the strike. Another jab, another effortless deflection. His eyes narrow. He threw a combination, jab, cross, hook, and found himself striking air, her body shifting just beyond reach, her feet silent on the mat. A flicker of frustration passed across his face. He stepped in with a front kick meant to rattle her. Loretta pivoted, let his momentum carry him past, and tapped his shoulder as he stumbled by. A quiet, almost playful tag that made the parents on the bench gasp. Connor's cheeks flushed. "Lucky," he muttered. Loretta's voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "It's not luck if you can do it twice." The rest of class passed in a strange tension, Connor pushing harder, Loretta giving only what was necessary, always one move ahead, always controlled. By the end, his hair clung damply to his forehead, his GI rumpled. She, by contrast, looked as if she could go another hour. When Liam called for bows to close the session, Connor's eyes met hers. For the first time, there was no mockery in them, only something darker. A promise. And Loretta knew then, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next week, the dojo felt different. The air was heavier, charged with an undercurrent that hummed between the walls like a low drum beat. Loretta noticed it the moment she stepped through the double doors. Conversations dropped in volume, eyes lingered on her a fraction too long, and even the sound of feet on the mat seemed sharper, like the place was holding its breath. Coach Liam stood near the notice board, a sheet of paper in his hand, speaking in a low voice to a cluster of parents. Brenda Williams, dressed in a crisp white blouse and diamond studs, stood at the center of the group like a general marshaling her troops. She wasn't even pretending to be discreet. Her eyes slid toward Loretta with an unmistakable gleam of challenge. Loretta crossed to the bench where she usually set her bag, aware of the sideways glances. Jaden, who had tagged along to watch, sat stiff beside her, his hands balled into fists. "They're talking about you," he whispered. "I gathered," Loretta murmured. She didn't look at Brenda or the other parents. She'd learned long ago that some people thrived on being acknowledged in the heat of their pettiness. Moments later, Liam clapped his hands for attention. "Listen up, everyone. The annual charity sparring challenge is coming up in 3 weeks. All ages, all skill levels. Proceeds go to the Children's Hospital." He stepped to the board and pinned the sheet up. "If you want to participate, sign your name. Matches will be announced a week before." Students swarmed the board in a noisy rush, their chatter mingling with the scratch of markers. Connor shouldered his way through, grinning as he scrawled his name in thick letters. When the crowd thinned, Loretta walked up, pen in hand, and quietly added her own name. The sound that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp. A laugh from Connor, short and incredulous, followed by a drawled, "You? Oh, this is gonna be good." His friends chuckled, but their voices didn't carry the same confidence as before. She met his gaze for a beat. "Guess we'll find out," she said, then walked away without waiting for his reply. By the next class, the whispers had multiplied. Some students offered her polite encouragement, others avoided her eyes entirely. She could feel the divide forming. Half the dojo was waiting to see her fail, the other half quietly hoping she wouldn't. That night, she trained in her backyard under the halo of the porch light. The grass was cool under her bare feet, the air thick with the smell of honeysuckle. Her movements were precise, deliberate, each strike a punctuation mark, each block a sentence in a language only her body spoke fluently. Jaden sat on the back steps, his eyes wide, the light catching in them as he watched her flow from one kata to the next. "Grandma," he said quietly, "what if they put you against Connor?" Loretta paused mid-stance, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Then I'll have the honor of teaching him what his belt doesn't." 2 days later, the dojo was full when Liam posted the official match list. Students crowded forward, scanning for their names. Loretta hung back, letting the noise settle before she stepped up. Her eyes found her name almost instantly, and froze. Opponent, Connor Williams. The room shifted around her. Someone let out a low whistle. A girl near the back muttered, "No way!" Jaden's head snapped toward her, his face pale. Brenda's sharp voice cut through the murmurs. "Absolutely not. This is outrageous." Liam stepped in, his tone calm but firm. The committee made the pairings. All participants signed the same waiver. Both are eligible. Brenda's lips thinned. "She'll get hurt." "Perhaps," Liam said evenly, "but that's the risk we all take when we step onto the mat." Connor emerged from the cluster, reading the list for himself. His momentary surprise flickered and vanished, replaced by a slow, toothy grin. "Easy win," he said loudly. "I'll try not to break anything important, Granny." Laughter trickled through the crowd, but it was thinner now, less certain. Loretta stepped forward, closing the distance between them. I look forward to our match, she said softly, her tone as steady as the weight of a drawn bowstring. For a moment, Connor's smirk faltered. Just a moment. On the drive home, Jaden's worry spilled out in a rush. Grandma, you don't understand. He's brutal when he spars. Coaches have to remind him to control his hits. I know exactly what he is, she interrupted gently, and that's exactly why I need to face him. Suspense curled in the air between them like smoke. The match was 3 weeks away, but the countdown had already begun, and in Loretta's mind, each day until then would be a step closer to teaching Connor, Williams, and everyone watching, that strength wasn't about age or color or even the gi you wore. It was about what you carried in the quiet center of yourself, waiting for the right moment to strike. The gymnasium smelled faintly of floor polish and anticipation. Tournament day had arrived, and Pine Creek's community center had been transformed. Blue mats spread like a stage under the bright overhead lights, ringed by rows of folding chairs already full of spectators. Hand-painted banners for the charity event hung along the walls, and a cluster of reporters hovered in one corner, cameras poised to catch the day's best moments. Loretta stood in the women's locker room alone for a brief breath of stillness before the noise claimed her. Her pink gi lay folded on the bench, the fabric neatly pressed, its color as bold as the first day she wore it. She ran her hands over the lapels, feeling the faint give in the fabric, the years that had led her to this moment pressing close around her. Today wasn't just a match, it was the answer to every whisper, every smirk, every "careful, Granny." Outside, the sound of the crowd swelled as another match wrapped up. Jaden's voice came through the door, muffled but urgent. "Grandma, they're calling for the next division." She tied her belt slowly, the ends falling evenly at her sides, then opened the door. Jaden's eyes widened, not because of the GI, but because of her face. She was smiling in that quiet, dangerous way he'd only ever seen once before, the day she'd decided to join his class. The walk to the mat felt like moving through a tide of energy, people leaning in to get a better look, phones rising to record. Brenda Williams sat in the front row, her arms crossed tightly, her gaze locked on Loretta like a hawk tracking prey. Connor was already on his side of the mat, stretching with exaggerated casualness, throwing in a few flashy high kicks for the crowd. The referee, a seasoned black belt from another dojo, called them to the center. Light to medium contact, points for clean strikes, first to 5 or 3 minutes. Wain. Whichever comes first. They bowed. Connor's bow was shallow, mocking. Loretta's was precise, her eyes never leaving his. Begin! Connor exploded forward, his speed startling even those who'd seen him fight before. His jab-cross combo sliced through the air, but Loretta wasn't there. She pivoted, caught his momentum, and with a twist of her hips, sent him sailing over her shoulder. The sound of his landing cracked through the gym like a starter pistol. For a heartbeat, the place was silent. Then gasps, then scattered applause that swelled as Connor scrambled to his feet, his face flushed. 2 points, Loretta Johnson, the referee called. Connor's grin returned, but it was thinner now, brittle around the edges. He circled, testing her guard, feinting left, striking right. She met each move with quiet efficiency, her feet gliding over the mat, redirecting his power instead of meeting it head-on. Then he lunged with a side kick aimed at her ribs. In one motion, she stepped to the outside, caught his leg, and swept the other from under him. He hit the mat harder this time, the sound punching into the crowd's chest. 3-0, the referee announced. The noise in the room shifted. No longer the chuckles of spectators expecting an easy show, but the murmur of people realizing they might be watching something entirely different. Connor's next attack was reckless, all speed and muscle. She let him come, blocking, parrying, each contact a little redirection until he overcommitted on a hook. In the blink of an eye, she stepped in, locked his arm, and held him until his pride bent enough for his hand to tap her shoulder. Match point, Loretta Johnson. The gym erupted. People were on their feet, cheering, whistling, some even shouting her name. Loretta bowed to Connor, then to the crowd, her face calm as still water. In that moment, it wasn't about the score. It was about the silence after the laughter, the collective intake of breath when the thing they'd been so sure about shattered right in front of them. And as she walked off the mat, the applause still roaring in her ears, Loretta knew she hadn't just won a match. She'd changed the story everyone would tell about the pink G grandma. By the time Loretta left the mat, the sound in the gym felt different. Less like a crowd watching a karate tournament, more like a congregation that had just witnessed a miracle. People leaned over rows of chairs to shake her hand. Strangers clapped her on the shoulder. Even kids who had been laughing at her just weeks ago were now looking at her with wide, almost reverent eyes. Jaden was the first to reach her, darting through the tangle of legs and chairs. He threw his arms around her waist so hard she had to take a step back to steady them both. "Grandma, you destroyed him," he blurted, his voice somewhere between awe and disbelief. Loretta chuckled, smoothing his hair. "I didn't destroy anyone, baby. I just reminded him there's always someone who can teach you something." Across the gym, Connor stood with his hands on his hips, breathing hard. For a moment, their eyes met. He hesitated, then gave her a small, almost reluctant nod. No smirk, no swagger, just a boy who'd been humbled in public and was still figuring out what to do with that truth. Brenda, however, wasn't ready for grace. She yanked Connor's bag from the bench and marched toward the exit, her heels clicking like gunshots. The crowd parted for her, but the applause never stopped. That night, Jaden couldn't stop replaying the fight in their living room. He mimicked her sidesteps, her sweeps, her throws, nearly knocking over a lamp in the process. And then you went whoosh and bam, down he went. He acted out Connor hitting the mat, clutching his own shoulder for dramatic effect. Loretta laughed until her sides ached. By morning, the match was all over town. Someone had filmed the entire bout and posted it online with the caption, "Pinky Granny just tossed the dojo star like a rag doll." Within hours, it had racked up thousands of views, hundreds of comments. People she hadn't spoken to in years were calling, texting, leaving messages. A reporter from the local TV station showed up at her porch with a cameraman in tow. The interview felt surreal. Lights in her face, a microphone pinned to her cardigan, questions rapid-fired about her incredible comeback. Loretta kept her answers simple. She wasn't here for fame, just finishing something she'd started a long time ago. But the ripple effect was bigger than she imagined. Letters began arriving from women her age and older, telling her she'd inspired them to sign up for self-defense classes or dust off old uniforms. A 72-year-old from Ohio wrote, "I thought my fighting days were over. Turns out, they're just beginning." A week later, Loretta walked into the dojo for evening class and found Connor waiting by the entrance, hands stuffed into his pockets. He looked different, less sure of himself, but not in a defeated way. When she stopped in front of him, he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Johnson, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, and you're really good. My dad says I should learn from you." Loretta studied him for a moment, then offered her hand. "Takes courage to admit when you've been wrong. Let's see if you've got the courage to get better, too." Inside, Coach Liam called for everyone's attention. "I've got an announcement," he said. "Starting next month, we're adding a new legacy class, designed for older students, families training together, anyone who wants to prove it's never too late to learn. And I'd like Mrs. Johnson to help lead it." The applause came quick and warm. Jaden grinned so wide she thought his face might split. Connor clapped too, and didn't stop until everyone else did. Loretta bowed, her heart swelling with something bigger than pride. She'd stepped onto the mat in a pink gi, expecting to prove something to her grandson. She hadn't expected to change the culture of the dojo, to inspire strangers, to remind an entire community that strength could come in any color, at any age. As class began, a new student, a tall boy with a cocky strut, made a loud joke about training with grandma. The words barely left his mouth before Jaden shot Loretta a knowing look. She smiled, walked toward the boy, and said in the calmest voice possible, "Welcome, let's see what you've got." 5 minutes later, he was flat on the mat, staring up at the ceiling while the rest of the class tried not to laugh. Loretta offered him a hand up, her voice as kind as it was unshakable. "Lesson 1, she said. Never underestimate the quiet ones." And just like that, the pink G was no longer a joke. It was a warning.